I couldn't walk for 2 weeks after my Amish special day. Everyone said it was normal. The pillow smells like cedar and the lavender Mama tucked inside the case 3 days before. I'm lying on my side because I can't lie on my back. I can't lie on my back because something inside me feels torn open, like a seam that gave way, and nobody knows how to sew it closed. The clock in the hallway ticks. Outside, a horse shifts in the stall, and the sound of its hoof on the wood floor is louder than my own breathing. It's morning. I think it's morning. The light through the curtain is gray, the kind of gray we get in late October when the frost hasn't melted yet. My husband, no, wait, he's not my husband yet in my head. He's still the boy from the next farm over. Eli. Eli is sleeping on his side too, turned away from me, and his shoulders are doing that little shake men's shoulders do when they're trying not to cry and failing. I try to sit up. My legs won't hold me. I try again. They won't. I am 18 years old. I have been married for 14 hours, and I will not walk again without limping for 2 full weeks. Quick pause. My name is Rebecca, and this is Rebecca Amish Home. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, what did your community teach you to call normal that you later learned was anything but? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. In our community, there's a rule nobody ever speaks out loud, and that's the whole point. The unspoken ones are the strongest. The girl is this. A girl is not to know what happens on her wedding night. Not the mechanics of it, not the feeling of it, not the word for any part of her own body below her collarbone. The idea, the way it was passed down to us from the old country, is that knowledge is the same as wanting, and wanting is the same as sinning, and a pure girl walks to the altar empty so her husband can fill her with whatever God intends. That's how it was explained to me once, not directly, but in a sermon about Eve, where the bishop said the trouble started when she got curious. I was 9. I remember picking at a splinter on the bench until my thumb bled because I didn't want to look up, and the rule lived everywhere. It lived in the way Mama would change the subject if my older sister Sarah came in from the barn with hay in her hair and her cheeks too pink. It lived in the way the married women stopped talking when the unmarried girls walked into the kitchen. I asked once, I was maybe 12, I asked Aunt Mary why the new bride down the road had been crying at church, and Aunt Mary just looked at me, and her eyes did this thing where they went flat and far away, and she said, "Rebecca, pass the butter." That was the whole answer. Pass the butter. And I learned. You learn. That's the thing nobody tells you. You learn what not to ask before you ever learn what the questions are. Eli and I had known each other since we were small. He was the third boy in the Stoltzfus family, the quiet one, the one who fixed his little brother's shoes without being asked. He was 20. No, 21. He turned 21 the week before our wedding. I remember now because his mother made choufle pie and burned the bottom and laughed about it. We courted for 9 months. Courting in our world doesn't mean what English people think. It means sitting on a porch swing in October with 3 feet between you, talking about whether the corn will come in early. It means his hand brushing yours when he passes the songbook at the singing, and you don't sleep that night because of it. I loved him. I think I loved him. I didn't know what love was yet, but I knew his voice made my chest feel warm, and I knew he was kind to the barn cats, and in our world, that was enough. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah pulled me into the cellar where we kept the canned peaches. She closed the door behind her. She was 24, married 4 years, 2 babies. She put her hands on my shoulders and she said 13 words. I counted them later, lying awake. She said, "It will hurt. Don't make noise. It gets easier after a while." 13 words. That was my entire preparation for the rest of my life. I waited for her to say something else. She didn't. She squeezed my shoulders and she went back upstairs, and I stood in the cellar smelling the peaches and the damp earth floor, and I felt my toes curl inside my shoes. The week of the wedding, the women came. They came to bake, to sew the last of the linens, to braid my hair the morning of. And I kept waiting. I kept waiting for one of them, any of them, to take me aside the way Sarah had, but to actually tell me something. Mama brushed my hair for an hour the night before. An hour. She didn't say a word. She just brushed and brushed until my scalp ached, and when she was done, she kissed the top of my head and she said, "You're a good girl, Rebecca." That's it. That was my mother's wedding night talk. You're a good girl. I lay in my narrow bed that last night under the quilt my grandmother made, the one with the blue and cream star pattern, and I stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a rabbit, and I thought, something is supposed to be said. Something is missing. Why is nobody saying it? The room they gave us was upstairs at Eli's parents' house, the small bedroom at the end of the hall with the slanted ceiling. There was a kerosene lamp on the dresser turned low, and the wick was smoking a little because nobody had trimmed it. The bed was a single bed. I remember thinking that, even then, how are two people supposed to, and stopping the thought. The quilt was double wedding ring, white and pale green, brand new, stiff with starch. There was a tin basin of water on the washstand. The window was open a crack, and you could hear the men down at the barn finishing the cleanup from the wedding supper, their voices muffled, a horse blowing through its nose. I was wearing the white cotton nightgown Mama sewed, long sleeves, buttoned to the throat. It smelled like the cedar chest. Eli came in and closed the door, and he stood there with his back against it for what felt like a long time. He was still wearing his good black trousers and his white shirt, but his suspenders were off, hanging at his sides. He kept pulling at the seam of his left sleeve, over and over. He wouldn't look at me. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap like I was at church, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and I could hear his breathing, and neither of us said anything for, I don't know, a minute, 3 minutes. Then he said, "Rebecca," just my name, and then, I don't really know what, and he didn't finish. He just looked at the floor, and I realized in that moment that he was as lost as I was. They hadn't told him either, not really. His father had told him something out by the woodpile that afternoon, and whatever it wasn't enough. His hands were shaking. A grown man's hands, shaking. He came and sat next to me on the bed, and the bed frame creaked, and we sat there like two children waiting to be told what to do. He reached for my hand, and his fingers were cold. Cold the way hands get when blood goes somewhere else. He said, "Are you?" And he stopped. He said, "I don't want to." And he stopped. I wanted to help him. I wanted to say something that would make it easier for both of us. But I didn't have the words either, because nobody had given me any. So I just nodded. I nodded at a question he hadn't finished asking. And that nod, that small, frightened, ignorant nod, was the only thing in that room that anyone would later call consent. What happened after that, I'm not going to describe in detail. I won't. It's not what this is for. What I will tell you is this. It took a long time, and it should not have taken a long time. There was no slowness because of tenderness. There was slowness because neither of us understood what our bodies were doing or what they were supposed to do. He was trying to follow some instruction his father had given him by the woodpile, and I was trying to be still and quiet the way Sarah had told me, and my body was locked. Locked the way a door is locked, and nobody had ever told me a body could do that, much less why. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood, and I stared at the water stain on this ceiling, and this one looked like a horse. I remember thinking, every ceiling in this world has a stain that looks like an animal. I don't know why I thought that. The mind goes strange places. When it was over, he rolled away from me, and he didn't speak. I lay there in the dark, and I could feel something warm on the sheet underneath me, and I knew without looking that it was blood. More than Sarah had said, more than seemed right. And there was a pain low in my body like nothing I had words for. I noticed the quilt had a loose thread near the binding. I reached down and I pulled it. I kept pulling. I pulled until a whole inch of the stitching came undone, and I felt strangely calm about it, because that thread was the only thing in the room I had any power over. Then Eli started crying. Quietly, with his back to me. And I didn't know what to do, so I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, "It's all right. It's all right." I was the one bleeding, and I was the one telling him it was all right. Here is the plain fact of it. Neither of us understood that a body needs time. Neither of us understood that pain is information, not obedience. Neither of us understood that what happened that night had a name, and that the name was not marriage, and was not duty, and was not what God wants. There is a word for what your body does when fear and ignorance arrive at the same time, and that word was never spoken in our community, not once, in any sermon, in any quiet talk in any cellar. Not once. I learned it 11 years later from a woman in a clinic in Lancaster who said it so gently I almost didn't hear her say it. He wasn't a bad man. I need you to understand that. He didn't know. None of us did. The silence in our community wasn't laziness, and it wasn't an oversight. It was a system. It was generations of women being told their bodies were dangerous, and generations of men being told their wives were a duty, and the cost of that system was paid in beds like ours, on nights like that one, in rooms with kerosene lamps and starched quilts and water stains on the ceiling. The thing I would later learn, the one fact that would crack me open in that clinic, was that what happened to me was not rare. It was not the exception. In communities like mine, it is the rule. And the rule has a body count nobody is counting. I couldn't walk for 2 weeks. That's the title, and it's not a metaphor. For 14 days, I moved through that house like an old woman, one hand on the wall, one foot in front of the other, and the women who came to visit the new bride brought casseroles and pickled beets, and they smiled at me and they said, "Oh, honey, that's normal. The first weeks are hard. Normal." They said it like they were talking about the weather. Eli's mother showed me how to soak in warm water with salt. His aunt brought a tincture in a brown glass bottle that smelled like vinegar. Nobody, not one woman, said the word doctor. I learned to climb the stairs sideways. I learned to sit down slow. I learned to brace one hand on the kitchen counter when I stood at the stove, and by the end of the first month, I had developed a way of moving through the world that was about 90% pretending I was fine. That's the survival system. You smile, you pour the coffee, you set the table, and inside your body, something is screaming, and you teach it, day by day, to scream quieter. And it wasn't only me. It was never only me. About 4 months in, there was a quilting at Eli's grandmother's house, and I was sitting between 2 young wives I'd known since school, Hannah and Lydia. We were stitching the border on a double wedding ring. Of course it was a wedding ring. And Hannah's needle slipped and she pricked her thumb and she said very quietly, almost to herself, "It still hurts." And Lydia, without looking up, said, "Mine took 6 months." 6 words. Mine took 6 months. And then there was this pause, this long pause where none of us breathed. And I almost said it. I almost said, "I couldn't walk for 2 weeks. I almost." But Hannah's mother walked into the room with a fresh pot of coffee, and the moment closed like a door, and we went back to stitching, and nobody said another word. Lydia stayed in my mind, though. Lydia had been married a year longer than me. Lydia had a baby on her hip by then, and another one coming, and her eyes had that flat, far-away look my Aunt Mary's had when I was 12. Months later, at a washing day, she told me, in pieces, between hanging sheets, that her wedding night had ended with her sleeping on the floor of the bathroom because the bed felt unsafe. She used the word, unsafe. I remember because it was the first time I'd heard a woman in our community use that word about her own marriage. She said her mother-in-law found her there in the morning and slapped her, gently, on the cheek and said, "Get up, you're a wife now. Get up, you're a wife now." That was the community's response system in one sentence. Any woman who came close to saying the truth was pulled back inside the silence by another woman, because the silence had to be protected. Because if one woman cracked, they might all crack, and then what would the world be? By our 3rd year, Lydia had stopped speaking about it at all. By our 5th, she wouldn't meet my eyes. I left the community when I was 29. That's a whole other story, and I'll tell it. But the moment I'm telling you about now happened 11 months after I left, in a small clinic on the edge of Lancaster, in a room with a paper sheet on the table and a poster on the wall. The poster had a diagram of a woman's body. I had never seen one. I want you to understand that. I was 29 years old, and I had never seen a drawing of my own anatomy, with the parts labeled, with the words written underneath in plain black letters. The nurse practitioner, her name was Diane, she had gray hair in a braid and reading glasses on a chain. She walked me through it, one word at a time, and when she got to one particular word, one particular muscle, and she explained what it does when a person is afraid, my hands started to shake. They shook for 3 days. I'm not exaggerating. 3 days. The word was vaginismus. I'm going to say it plainly because nobody said it plainly to me. It's the body's involuntary response to fear and pain. The muscles lock, and the more you try to push through, the worse it gets. It is not a moral failure. It is not disobedience. It is not the first weeks being hard. It is a medical condition with a name and a treatment, and it has existed for as long as women have existed, and not one person in my community had ever spoken its name in my hearing. Diane drew a little diagram on a paper towel. She drew an arrow. She said, "This is what was happening to you, sweetheart." Sweetheart. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 40 minutes afterward, and I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there until the windows fogged up and I had to wipe them with my sleeve to drive home. I wasn't angry. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't angry. I was sad. Devastatingly sad. Sad for the girl who sat on the edge of that single bed in the white cotton nightgown. Sad for the boy who stood by the door pulling at the seam of his left sleeve. Sad for Eli, who was as much a prisoner of the silence as I was, who had cried with his back to me on our wedding night because he knew, on some animal level, that something had gone wrong, and he had no words for it either. That's the thing nobody tells you. The silence didn't just hurt the women. It hurt everyone. It hurt him. It hurt his father, who had to walk his son out to the woodpile and stumble through whatever broken instruction he gave. It hurt all of us. We were all carrying it. I tried to explain it to a friend once, an English friend I made after I left, a kind woman who had grown up in a regular suburb in Ohio. I told her about the wedding night. I told her about the 2 weeks. I told her about Diane and the paper towel diagram. And she looked at me and she said, "Why didn't anyone just tell you?" And I didn't have an answer. I sat there in her kitchen, with her dishwasher humming and her dog asleep on the linoleum, and I realized she would never fully understand. Not because she didn't care, she cared, she was crying, but because the world she came from had a word for everything, and the world I came from had a silence for everything. And the distance between those two worlds is something you can't walk across in one conversation. That's the loneliness of leaving. You carry a country in your body that nobody else can visit, and still, I have to tell you what that country gave me, because if I don't, I'm lying. The sound of horses at dawn, that low, blowing sound they make through their nostrils when the air is cold and the barn door first opens. I have not heard a sound more peaceful in my life, and I miss it like I miss my own mother. Bread from a wood oven, the crust so dark it's almost black, the inside so soft you could fold it, the smell filling a whole house for a whole afternoon. I have spent 8 years trying to bake that bread in an electric oven, and it has never once tasted the same. And my grandmother's hands when she was praying, folded on the kitchen table after supper, the knuckles swollen from 70 years of work, the wedding band so worn it was almost a wire. I can close my eyes right now and see those hands, and I am homesick for a place that hurt me. Both things are true. Both things have to be true, or none of this makes sense. Here is what I would say, if I could say it in one sentence. What happened to me was silence dressed up as holiness. That's it. That's the whole thing. Beauty and harm can live in the same house. And they did, and they do. And I am not going to pretend otherwise to make anyone comfortable. I'm not building a life of bitterness. I'm building a life of choosing. I chose to leave. I chose to learn. I chose to say the words out loud that nobody said to me. And sometimes, when I'm kneading dough on a Tuesday afternoon, I find myself humming a hymn in Pennsylvania Dutch, and I let myself hum it. And I don't apologize for it because that song is mine too. They don't get to take it from me, and I don't have to give it back. If you grew up somewhere your own body was kept from you like something dangerous, if the word for what happened to you was never spoken in the rooms you grew up in, I see you. You survived something, and surviving is enough. You are not broken. You were not the problem. The silence was the problem, and the silence was never yours to carry, even though they handed it to you the day you were born. To the woman still inside the community, listening to this with the volume low, I see you. To the woman who left and still cries at the smell of a wood stove, I see you. To the woman thinking about leaving who hasn't told a soul, I see you. To the woman who's been married 20 years and only now is starting to put words to what her wedding night actually was, I see you. To the woman who recognized herself 3 minutes ago and had to pause this video to breathe, I see you. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. If there was one sentence, one image, one moment that touched something in you, tell me what it was. I read them. I read all of them. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, about the years after, about the day I packed one suitcase, about the woman who picked me up at the end of the lane, but I'm getting closer. If you want to walk with me through those stories, this is Rebecca Amish home, and I'd love for you to stay. And to the members and Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. Your body was never the sin, the silence was.